Have you ever noticed that a childhood summer felt like an entire novel, while a recent weekend flipped past like a single paragraph? That feeling that time accelerates as we get older isn't just nostalgia whining, it's a mix of cognition, memory, neural pacing, and the kind of life you build around yourself. Over the next several minutes, I'll walk you through the main reasons the subjective tempo changes, what the science and common sense say, and small, testable moves you can try to make days feel fuller again. No gloom, just curiosity and a few practical experiments. Bridging from that everyday puzzle, let's start with a quick, intuitive snapshot. Why does the calendar feel compressed? Have you ever thought about the simple math behind it? For a 5-year-old, a single year is 20% of their life. For a 50-year-old, it's 2%. And that proportional shrinkage makes each year feel subjectively smaller. This proportional theory is blunt but useful. Because a unit of time is a much larger fraction of your total life when you are young, it naturally looms larger in your subjective experience. That effect alone explains some of the perception, especially for milestone markers like birthdays and school years. But if the proportional idea were the whole story, we'd expect everyone's sense of time to shrink in lockstep. And that's not what happens. Some people report rich, full late decades, while others feel time accelerating dramatically. So, proportionality is one piece of a bigger puzzle. It creates a baseline bias, but attention, memory encoding, novelty, and neural processing determine how bulky or thin each subjective year feels. As a small, practical nudge, consider adding a tiny monthly ritual that marks the month distinctly, an evening walk in a new place or a short personal journal entry to give those months a slightly larger subjective footprint. Bridging from math into memory, let's look at why the diary of your life feels thinner as you age. If you imagine the past as a bookshelf, childhood and young adulthood can have densely packed, varied volumes: first days at school, new romances, unfamiliar cities. Those firsts create rich episodic memories with lots of contextual details. As adulthood settles into routine, many days are filled with repeats, commutes, recurring tasks, predictable social loops. When an interval is full of distinctive, novel events, it expands in your memory. When it's a blur of repetition, there are fewer anchors, so the same clock time feels shorter in retrospect. This is memory density at work. Neuroscience suggests that strong encoding happens when there are salient changes, surprising events, or emotional peaks. Those produce many retrieval cues later. Without those cues, months become a homogeneous strip of similar events. Practically, you can increase memory density cheaply. Add micro-novelties like a different route to work, a 1-hour class, a conversation with someone new, or even a deliberately unusual meal. These small deviations create more retrieval hooks, so when you look back, you can actually reconstruct days with more texture. For the next month, try deliberately introducing one small new experience each week and notice whether the weeks feel fuller in memory when you review them. Bridging from memory to the moment-by-moment experience, attention is the next lever to inspect. Attention is like a magnifying lens on time. When you attend closely to something, the moment stretches. When you are distracted or multitasking, the same moment contracts. Perspective time, how long something feels while you're experiencing it, relies heavily on how much cognitive bandwidth you allocate. If you spend an hour fully absorbed in a compelling conversation or a novel activity, that hour can feel long and vivid. The same hour spent switching between tabs, notifications, and chores often feels like it evaporated. Modern life is designed to fragment attention, and that fragmentation creates a chronic compression of lived time. Another wrinkle. Sustained focused attention increases the number of perceptual samples your brain takes, producing a richer stream of experience. So one practical experiment is straightforward and low friction. Pick a 20-minute block this afternoon, turn off your phone, and do one thing with undivided attention. Read a chapter, walk without audio, or cook slowly, and then notice whether that block felt longer and more satisfying than an equal block spent multitasking. Bridging attention to the brain's internal clock. Let's dive into neural pacing and dopamine's role in timing. At the neural level, the brain measures intervals using mechanisms that are influenced by neurotransmitters like dopamine and by overall processing speed. One way researchers model timing is with pacemaker accumulator frameworks. Imagine a neural pacemaker that emits ticks. Attention and dopamine levels affect how many ticks are registered and how quickly they're accumulated. Younger brains typically have faster processing speed and higher dopaminergic tone, which allows more perceptual samples in the same objective interval. As dopamine levels and processing speeds subtly change with age, the brain samples fewer units per second, and the same clock time contains fewer perceived events, making it feel shorter. Reduced arousal or slower processing effectively compresses subjective time because the brain creates fewer discrete moments to stitch into memory. Another practical corollary. Anything that temporarily boosts alertness and sampling movement, brief cold exposure, bright light, or a brisk walk, can increase perceived moment density and make time feel more expansive. Try a short alertness ritual before a meeting or creative task for 2 weeks, immediate sensory wake-ups like cold splash, quick movement, or bright daylight, and see whether those events feel subjectively longer and clearer in memory. Bridging from neural sampling to novelty, remember that newness is one of time's best amplifiers. Novel experiences produce many unique contextual markers in memory, so they expand how long a period feels when you look back. The first time you visit a foreign city, every corner is encoded as distinct. By the 10th visit, the same city yields fewer fresh anchors. This is why travel, learning, and firsts feel disproportionately long in hindsight. Importantly, novelty doesn't have to be grand or expensive. Micro-novelties work because the brain responds to prediction errors and new contextual cues. Examples include learning a short phrase in a new language, trying a different workout, or chatting with someone outside your usual circle. Each of these creates new retrieval cues that later give the subjective impression of a denser, longer stretch of time. For an experiment this week, add one gentle novelty, visit a different cafe, listen to a podcast outside your typical genre, or take a new walking route, and notice whether that day reads back as more eventful. Bridging novelty to routine, consider the double-edged sword of efficiency and automation. As you get better at tasks, they become automated, conserving energy and freeing cognitive capacity for other things. That's an undeniable gain. But automation also reduces the number of distinctive mental events, smoothing days into templates that your brain processes with fewer prediction errors. When the brain predicts accurately and processes input efficiently, it generates fewer surprise signals and, consequently, fewer memorable markers, so time contracts. This is the trade-off: competence versus fullness. The smart move is not to abandon efficiency but to deliberately insert mild inefficiency or play. Cook a recipe that requires learning a small new technique, take a longer scenic route on a weekend, or spend 5 extra minutes savoring a sensory detail you usually speed past. These little investments create texture without sacrificing productivity, and they give you more material when you later reconstruct the week. Bridging routine and prediction. Predictive coding offers a useful model for understanding subjective tempo. The brain is constantly predicting incoming sensory data. When its predictions match reality, processing is economical and experience feels less eventful. But when prediction errors occur, novelty, surprise, or violation of expectation, the brain allocates resources to update its models, and that process makes moments feel richer and longer. Midlife tends to produce highly stable environments where the model is usually right, which reduces prediction errors and compresses subjective time. Deliberately creating small prediction errors, changing the sequence of a familiar routine, introducing an unexpected but harmless element into a meeting, or taking an unfamiliar route forces the brain to register more data and encode more details. These mild mismatches expand memory density without being stressful. Once a week, introduce a tiny, non-threatening surprise into a routine to create a predictable spark of novelty that the brain must process and remember. Bridging predictive mechanisms to social structure, adult roles and schedules also shave off perceived time. Adult life is scaffolded by repetitive social patterns, work shifts, family routines, scheduled obligations, which cluster days into similar templates. That clustering reduces variance between days, and low variance results in fewer distinct memory markers. Emotional valence plays a role too. Days filled with low arousal tasks are more likely to blur, while high arousal, meaningful events stand out. To reclaim subjective time, carve out an unscripted hour weekly for curiosity-driven activity, something with low social obligation that's purely exploratory. That hour can be reading something you wouldn't normally read, visiting a different neighborhood, or having a conversation without an agenda. Over the course of months, these unscripted hours create an accumulating set of unique memories that interrupt the template and give retrospective time more volume. Bridging all these threads together, here's a compact, practical plan you can try to slow the subjective rush. Combine attention, novelty, and small prediction perturbations into a simple 30-day experiment. Track one metric of focused time each day, a 20-minute phone-free block, add one small novelty each week, and perform a short alertness ritual before events you want to remember. Treat these as data. At the end of each week, write a single line about the most memorable thing that week. This process increases memory density, sharpens neural sampling, and introduces prediction errors in manageable doses, which together stretch subjective experience without upending your life. Also remember the low-hanging red flags. Sudden cognitive decline, abrupt mood changes, or dramatic memory loss are not just normal aging and warrant medical attention, but for the everyday sense that time is slipping away, these experiments give you a gentle, evidence-based way to reclaim richer days. If you enjoyed this deep dive into why time speeds up and want more practical experiments for making life feel fuller and slower, subscribe or follow for weekly bite-sized tests you can try and report back on.